I'm Natasha Duarte, Director of the Composting Association of Vermont. I'm doing a site visit today, and I thought it might be fun to bring you along. I don't know if you can see behind me, this is a Jora tumbler, and behind it is a soil saver bin, or that type of bin that the tumbler's emptied into once the food scraps are mostly decomposed in the tumbler. Let's take a look. I don't know if you can see that. It looks pretty wet to me, probably a little too wet. And there's some larger pieces in there. I'm going to do a moisture test, the squeeze test. So let's get a handful. All right, so this is just out of the first chamber. And when I squeeze, although moisture doesn't necessarily drip out, I think it's mostly because it's just muck. And it doesn't smell that bad, but this isn't really the right consistency. So that maybe is a good example of when the squeeze test isn't going to give you the information you need, but just by observation, you can tell that this isn't quite right. Let's see what else is in here. So here's a banana peel that's still pretty well intact. We're going to go ahead and chop that up. At home, I have a stump. I use a hatchet. Really, you can put stuff in a bucket and use an edger. You can chop stuff up in your kitchen before you put it in your composter. That might be the easiest way. So I'm basically just chopping up this corn husk. All right, so what else do we have in here? It's fine to use these compostable paper plates in your compost bin or in your compost tumbler, either one. But you can see here that they were stacked, and that's going to take longer for them to break down. So the ones on the outside are definitely starting to decompose. The ones on the inside, not as much. The other thing that I would recommend is shredding them if you can. So again, surface area is an important piece. You can just shred them up and add them back in, or when you're adding them the first time ideally, and try to put them in sort of knots so they're all in a stack. So now that we've chopped stuff up, we're just going to put it back in. So they've been using some shredded leaves, straw, and shredded paper, and they're getting a lot of this kind of ball formation in their compost. Part of that is from the tumbling action, but it's also because it's too wet, so it's kind of clumping. They were also using some shredded paper, and sometimes that can clump as well, or sort of layer. So when we put this all back together, we're going to add some wood shavings. And I like them for the tumblers because they're really high in carbon, higher than, say, dried leaves or something like that. So you need less volume to get your right carbon to nitrogen ratio. And so what that does is it maximizes the space you have in your tumbler for your food scraps. I also like them better than, say, sawdust, which is that really fine dust, because as soon as that gets wet, that can clump as well and create some of that balling that we saw already happening in this tumbler. So these have a lot of good surface area. They're curly. I get the question a lot as to whether they need to stay dry, if they should be kept dry. I recommend that because food scraps are really wet. And so this helps also get that moisture right. If these were soaking wet, they'd still have the high carbon, but it wouldn't really help us with our wet situation in the tumbler. So although the normal compost recipe for a bin or for windrows or a pile is 3 parts carbon to 1 part nitrogen, we use less than that in the tumbler. Really, it's like 1-to-1 or even a little less than 1-to-1 should be fine. Why this is we're using that really high carbon to nitrogen material, the wood shavings. So we're going to put in, I would say maybe 2 of those per chamber. Now you can buy these, it's like guinea pig bedding. If you have chickens or laying hens, you can certainly use that mix in here as well. All right, so now that we've added the carbon, we're going to close this back up. Give it a good spin. And now come on back and take another look. All right, so now we've added about 4 of those yogurt containers of wood shavings. You can see it's pretty well mixed in there, both sides. And what I'm going to suggest is that in a couple days, or at least the next time you add something, that you check it again and start using these wood chips as the carbon in the tumbler to correct for the moisture. It'll absorb some of that moisture. And then you should also see a faster decomposition rate. And then you can move it into your black compost bin behind it. If you have other sources of carbon or manure, horse bedding, whatever that is, when you take it out of the tumbler and add it into your rigid bin, that's a great time to add in those other materials, those other feedstocks. And really, again, that's just to maximize the processing of the food scraps in the tumbler. And we do this to keep odors down. It reduces the ick factor a little bit. And animals can't really get into this tumbler system. It's up off the ground. My recommendations for this site are chop things up smaller so there's more surface area for the decomposers to do their work on. Add a higher carbon content brown material like wood shavings into the tumbler. Other materials can be added into the rigid bin once it leaves the tumbler. If you're using or need to continue using shredded paper or sawdust and you see those balls forming, go ahead and put gloves on and break them up, or use a small hand tool. And again, that'll just help prevent pockets of anaerobic activity. I hope you enjoyed coming along with me on my site visit. Happy composting!